Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to set out the GSD opposition's contribution in the areas of tourism, housing, heritage, planning, and lands. On the tourism statistics, the general point to make is that they have not been as assiduously updated online of late. I'm not clear why that may be the case. The cruise liner statistics are the exception, with the last updates online from June this year. This is particularly helpful when one considers that the tourism survey report was only laid before the House yesterday, the very date that the debate on the appropriation bill started. By comparison, the figures for Upper Rock visitor numbers end in July of 2021. When asked for updated figures in respect of the various tables which comprise the tourist, air traffic and hotel occupancy survey reports, the Minister rather unhelpfully declined to provide the answer, telling me to await the formal issue of the reports. It is not clear what the reason is for the delay or refusal to provide the answer in response to a legitimate parliamentary question. Is it that the Minister is less than keen to provide updated information in a transparent manner, or is there a more innocent explanation that administratively it has not been possible? I do not propose to make a value or political judgment at this stage, other than to say that whatever the reason, the opposition, but more importantly, the public are having a disservice visited upon them, and I urge the government to rectify this. For an analysis of the statistics which are available at the time of preparing for this contribution, one would need to focus on the cruise liner figures. What these show is that there is clearly a much welcomed improvement in a post-lockdown world, and I use those words advisedly because it would be inaccurate and clearly overly optimistic in light of increased infections, and we have one of our own currently undergoing the condition, to describe the current scenario as post-COVID. There is a significant jump in the number of passengers from March 2022 to April of 11,867, an increase of almost 60%. Although slightly down from April, this May's figures are looking promising at 20,479. If that statistic is compared with the immediate post-lockdown monthly average from July 2021 to March 2022 of 3,740, it represents a further sign of recovery in the sector, and this is to be welcomed, and we do so from this side of the House. We are not, however, quite there yet. This statement is backed up by the comparison which can be made with the same months, i.e. April and May in 2019, when the number of people arriving via cruise liners stood at 32,000 and 36,000 respectively, compared with 20,500 and 20,400 again, respectively, for this year. We hope that we can regain the share of the market that we once had. This requires energy and focus and should quite properly be private sector-led. As someone who has been described as being on the center-right of the political spectrum, the view that the private sector should take a lead and incur the expense of marketing and business development in order to bring more businesses here has an inherent ideological sense to it. This is not to say that the government should not play its part. From a very macro level, Gibraltar faces stiff competition. Gibraltar Port is having to contend with an increased dominance of the Cádiz and Malaga ports. Indeed, there has been talk for some years of La Línea itself also operating a cruise liner port. It will not be lost on members that this is competition, which has the potential of becoming even more acute should we accede to the Schengen space, in the event of the much sought-after deal with the EU becoming a reality. Coach tours to Gibraltar will be able to be sold, say, from Malaga, as is done from the Roman port of Civitavecchia to the Eternal City, which entails a 2-hour drive, not just dissimilar to what it would take from Malaga to here. If La Línea did ever become a reality in terms of cruise liner provision, the effect would be obvious. In other statistics, which are more contemporaneously available, coach passenger arrivals, we also see a similar picture of improvement, albeit not to the same pre-pandemic levels once again. The figures for January 2022 stood at 731, and as at May, they stood at 14,320. The comparative figures for 2019, however, were 7,246 and 27,100 respectively. The information we were given yesterday with the laying of on the table of the tourist survey, hotel occupancy and air traffic survey reports for 2021 shows that the overall tourist expenditure has risen from 97.51 million in 2020, which in itself, that figure represented a vertiginous drop from 307 million and 0.57 in 2019, is now starting to creep up, albeit slowly, to 128.19 million in 2021. The hotel occupancy figure is still comparatively low at 59.6% in 2021, although increased from 46.6% in 2020. We see a similar story with air arrivals, where there is a slow pickup in numbers, but certainly not the high numbers that anyone listening to the minister would think were arriving each time he announces a new airline come to Gibraltar, which, as we all know too well, never materializes in anything serious or long-lasting. Dwelling on some of the measures announced yesterday, the sustainable tourism tax of £3 per person per night of hotel stay and the £1 per cruise liner passenger, we on this side of the House have initial doubts as to whether this revenue-raising measure now, at this precise moment, when we are in the throes of a recovery of a severely and badly hit sector, is the best decision. Historically, Mr. Speaker, governments and oppositions have argued over how one party or another has fared in bringing more visitors here. But I think we need to spend much more political time and energy in analyzing what it is that we offer those visitors once they arrive. I'm told, for example, that there is a particular challenge to get passengers off the liners. Here we face competition with the liners themselves, given the full array of amenities and comforts which they offer on board, such that passengers need to be persuaded to come on shore. Liners, as will be expected, will go to where it is more profitable for them, and shore excursions is where they get a lot of their income and revenue. It is not yet known in those circumstances what the effect of the £1 surcharge will have on things. And this is where the competition is tough. This is where everything that we can do to improve the much-needed footfall on our streets must be done, from effective marketing on board liners to providing a Rolls-Royce service, fully integrated transport service, to the cleanliness of our streets, to high-quality customer care, to improving on our prices. A tall order, I know, a taller order which I think has eluded us for far too long. I say so in the least partisan of ways. As Gibraltar, we cannot afford to rest on our laurels. We have to accept the huge blow which the pandemic has brought in its wake, particularly in the tourism sector, and the consequential impact on our economy. In figures, and to put this in context, and the figures bear repetition, the Tourist Survey Report of 2019 clocked tourist expenditure, and I rounded up at £308 million. That dropped to £98 million, a whopping £210 million as a result of the pandemic. We, all of us, need to ensure that we do our bit to improve what we have to offer, and I am confident that it can be done. We on this side of the House are excited to offer the electorate at the next election our ideas in this sphere. Our view is that fundamental to that offering is that there is proper strategic thinking to be done, an opportunity which we thought the government lost during the lockdown period, as I put to the Minister in the televised debate we had back in January. We are fully conscious and aware of the amount of activity that this small area of the world has to put up with in order to provide what is, on any objective view, at least currently, a high standard of living. We have an airport, a port, a dockyard, a financial services industry, a vibrant construction industry, etc. All of these features has an impact, for example, on how clean our streets can be kept, or how pristine our buildings can be maintained, or indeed how busy with traffic our roads are. This is why we need to take stock, do a bit of navel gazing, and honestly and truly ask ourselves, what destination do we want to be? Should we be a day visitor destination, or do we want tourists to stay in our hotels? What type of hotels should we offer, if so? Once we answer fundamental questions like these, we will be able to inform the decisions that we take in full partnership with the operators within the industry in driving policy in this area. Our further view, in terms of basic themes which should drive policy in this area, is that there has to be much more joined-up thinking. The tourism department needs to talk to culture and sport, indeed even education, under one umbrella, and coordinate approaches in a formal way. Culture and sport bring people here, and that must be harnessed as part of our tourism and visitor experience potential. And educators must be brought in to encourage people to pursue career paths in the hospitality sector. I must say we are concerned as the answers we received when we asked detailed questions in connection with the Minister for Tourism's extensive travels. There is one currently in the order paper still to be addressed in relation to his trip to Bangladesh during the same period that he could have been in the Madrid travel fair in Fitur, which he failed to attend. There appears to be no focus strategy other than the clocking up of air miles on an almost obsessive desire to get a picture taken with the latest political or business celebrity in order to then publish it in the press with a standard quote saying how good and beneficial the particular trip or meeting was. It may do wonders for his scrapbook, but what does it do for Gibraltar? He runs a risk, Mr. Speaker, of becoming identified as a stalker in security risk and security risk by the security detail of famous personalities if he carries on this way. Where is the analysis as to why it is more productive to go to one event over another? What analysis is made as to what is likely to come of a trip? What business has been generated, and indeed, is it worthwhile attending again? Was the money, which is increasingly in short supply, well spent? We got absolutely no sense, with the greatest of respect to him, of that which sadly is not surprising, but nevertheless highly concerning. And simply to flag at this stage, Mr. Speaker, as regards the money, the information we have now indicates that the minister himself, i.e. excluding his delegation, only him, has cost the taxpayer in travel alone for him, I repeat, not his delegation, £28,527.45 in just 1 year. The appointment of the new CEO of the GTB has the potential of providing that new impetus and strategic leadership, and we wish the individual well. As the House will know, our main quarrel with the government was the location from which it would conduct operations. It became the subject of heated debate. They insisted it should be in London, on the ground that it was our main source market, although arguably we would say this is Spain. Whilst we said he should be here, at the destination he will be wanting to sell. In this connection, we had a rather vague smoke and mirrors response from the government, which is their want, in a recent question and answer session here. That half response spoke more to a childish avoiding of an admission that there has been, we suspect, a change of policy, and thereby avoid the "I told you so" reaction from this side than anything else. Eventually, the truth will come out. I fear, however, that the minister will continue to want to feature heavily when, say, we have an inaugural cruise line arrival with picture and plaque in tow, or showcase his last visit to some conference or other, all in a misguided attempt to improve his ratings. He has, after all, been associated with more flops and failures. Voltaire, Eastern Airways, Wizz Air, and I dare say Linewall Road very quickly come to mind. But I would urge him to give the new appointee wings. I say this not because of the filial connection, as I would be urging him to do so whoever the CEO may have been, but so that the significant salary is properly put to good use. The minister's career may not have taken off, but that does not mean that he should bring others down with him. Finally, under this head, I need to highlight to the House the concerns that have been expressed in the context of the employment situation within the Gibraltar Tourist Board, with recent complaints expressed publicly about employees being transferred unwillingly or employees leaving because of the minister's despotic manner. This is borne out by the reduction by 4 in the overall staff complement in this department from 24 last year to 20 this year. Our housing needs, Mr. Speaker, continue to be an issue. The waiting list figures available online as of April still show a total of 763 waiting to be housed, with the greatest demand being placed on the 1 RKB category, standing at 532. There is also a rather persistent figure of 200 applicants on the pre-list as of April 2021, which are the latest figures online, despite the table having been last updated in May 2022. It is welcome to note a decrease from February to March from 1,183 to the 763 figure that I've just mentioned from the general waiting list, i.e. excluding the pre-list. The anecdotal evidence that we receive as an opposition, however, continues to be that housing remains a persisting social issue of concern, with many of the approaches we deal with relating to housing. The Public Services Ombudsman in his report confirms when he states, and I quote, "Complaints against the Housing Authority continue to remain top of the list of departments, attracting the highest number of complaints," and I close the quote. I also quote my friend, the former opposition spokesman for housing, Mr. Reyes, when last year in this very debate, he said, and I quote him, "The reality today is that there is a need for housing, and it is the most vulnerable in Gibraltar who are suffering the worst. Most of the meetings I hold with constituents are about housing matters," and I close the quote. I can confirm that this is my own experience since I was given this responsibility recently. We hear of families in 9 square meter accommodation who have been waiting to be housed for years on end, some for 7 to 8 years, or other cases where there is an inexplicable failure to rehouse tenants while they continue to live in squalid conditions. The physical and psychological effects that these individuals have to endure are almost too much to bear, but bear it they do with resigned patience. The inevitable conclusion that one comes to is that the system is simply not working. The housing allocation scheme is still under review, and we eagerly await the soon-to-be-published new rules. As matters stand, however, there is a need for a radical shake-up. Firstly, our policy to create separate lists to buy and rent would be expected to both reduce the list and identify who is in real need of social housing. Secondly, this policy, coupled with our further policy in government to grab the bull by the horns and introduce means testing, would help us to further target those in real need. The minister's reply on this was, in some ways, with respect to him, underwhelming. In essence, it boiled down to a supposed administrative challenge which he claims results in PAYE earners suffering unfairness when compared to the self-employed. Are we really not pursuing what surely we can all agree, on all sides of the House, is a fair system because something somewhere is failing administratively? We need to move away from the concept that there is an entitlement to a fully funded, state-provided home irrespective of your wealth, and to a system which acknowledges that there are people who are in genuine need of social housing, with the state focusing assistance on these individuals and not others. We make absolutely no bones of our view that housing of this nature should be targeted at those individuals. Persons on low income or with specific medical or other special needs should be helped and not others. How many of us hear stories of luxury cars leaving government estate parking lots, for example? This needs to end. There should also be much better monitoring of those who claim that they live in government rented accommodation, but in fact live almost permanently in Spain. This is an abusive practice at various levels, as they hog much sought-after social housing subsidized by the taxpayer and benefit from other state-funded help in education or free parking. In respect of supported housing for the elderly, here too we need to see a fairer system in place, in which homeowners who have sacrificed life's luxuries to fund a mortgage and own their own home, they should be treated less fairly and are indeed discriminated against when compared to other individuals who may have done very well for themselves, may be in receipt of a healthy government occupational pension, lived in a government state all their lives, and therefore paid very low rent during their working life, and also, to boot, them being granted assisted living. This is unfair and should also be stopped. On rental arrears, the figure remains stubbornly and depressingly high. The full figure is £4,486,558 plus 25 pence. As at April 2022. I will not stand here and point the finger at the government. This is a problem which I am sure is complex to resolve, but more thinking must be done to bring that figure down. Gibraltar's public purse simply cannot afford to see this type of abuse as a permanent, long-lasting, perennial feature. Something needs to be done. We are still waiting for progress on the new Housing Act. Here we need to see the introduction of a fairer system again, where private landlords are able to make a profit on their property and thereby allow them to properly refurbish and improve the housing stock they own, while at the same time
prevents abusive action being meted out to tenants. The balancing act here is to prevent abuse in both directions, from tenant to landlord and from landlord to tenant. And we eagerly await the arrival of the new legislation and see if that balancing act has indeed been achieved. On affordable homes, the long-suffering applicants have experienced woeful delay in respect of all, without exception, all developments. Whether it's a Hassan Centenary, Bob Bellisa Mews, or Chatham Counterguard, the current dates that we are looking at, according to the latest replies we have had from the Minister, range from July 2023 in respect of Hassan Centenary to anything around the 2024-2025 mark, depending on site clearance issues in respect of the other two. All of this clearly creates financial burdens for some who are making payments towards the financing of their new flats, while in some cases paying for their current accommodation. The delays are also having an effect on those young people who are having to put their lives on hold until the flats are built. All of this in a context where the originally promised completion dates were, in at least one of the cases, pre-COVID. Indeed, their press release boasted at the time, this is in 2017, of, and I quote, hundreds of new homes as from August 2019, and I close the quote. When Chatham was announced in July 2019, the envisaged commencement date for construction was the last quarter of 2019, months before COVID hit us. As matters stand, not one brick has yet been laid in respect of this development and Bob Bellisa Mews. Indeed, not that many bricks were laid before COVID struck. So on this occasion, the pandemic cannot be reasonably used as a cause of the delay. And it will not be lost on anyone that the announcement of these, of the construction of these estates benefited them electorally in 2019, but yet they have failed to deliver. We need to pause also and make further plans for the future. We need to ask ourselves, what are our housing needs for the next 5, 10, and 15 years? We now hear of cases of individuals who would have been in their late teens when the first announcements were made in September 2017, who do not now have access to affordable housing, and there is no prospect whatsoever in sight of them receiving a flat anytime soon. The current East Side project only caters for 100 flats. We are staring at a missed and forgotten generation who must be catered for. It is also important, Mr. Speaker, to plan for the housing needs of people with disabilities. We need to ensure that there is provision of appropriate housing, including specialist and supported housing. This is crucial if we are to help them live safe and independent lives. Unsuitable or unadapted housing can have a negative impact on disabled people and their carers. It can lead to mobility problems inside and outside the home, poorer mental health, and even impact on their employment prospects. Without accessible and adaptable housing, disabled people risk facing discrimination and disadvantage in this area. We need to recognize the diverse range of needs that exist. Disabilities can include people with ambulatory difficulties, blindness, learning difficulties, even autism and mental health issues, which will generate a range of housing requirements which may themselves change over time. So I understand that it is an administratively difficult issue to grapple with. But to enable disabled people to live more safely and independently, the Ministry of Housing needs to engage much more in ensuring that any future planning considers these variety of needs. It makes sense from our perspective to build accessible housing from the outset rather than have to make fundamental adaptations at a later stage. Such an approach is bound to make financial savings into the future. Appropriately built flats should be included in all new developments where possible. We hope to make future announcements as to the plans for government in this connection at the appropriate time. On a separate note, arising from the figures, I would simply point out that the Housing Works Agency, I think this was mentioned by my friend Mr. Reyes, is expected to receive £1.9 million less from the Improvement and Development Fund than the forecast outturn for 21-22, as that is the amount by which the expenditure on works and repairs is going to suffer this coming year. And we'll need to analyze that during the course of the next few months. On planning, we see the same lack of overall strategic thinking we referred to in the context of tourism. It is acknowledged and appreciated on this side of the House that in a place so small, and I make a similar point I made earlier, over which so many demands are placed, it is very difficult to strike what are often very challenging balances. Nevertheless, more needs to be done, both strategically and innovatively, to counter the obvious failing of the current government. Let's take the question of addressing our housing needs. The Chief Minister has spoken of the only way being up due to the shortage of land mass. Others, from a heritage, well-being perspective, would focus on the negative impact that tall buildings have not just on the aesthetics, but also on the effect that the changing face of Gibraltar will have on its beauty, history, and critically, on community cohesion between the entitled and the deprived. In the context of the recent application for the Caleta Hotel development, we saw those tensions at play. We have, on the one hand, an entrepreneur who, let's face it, wants to invest to make a profit, and there is nothing wrong with that. But in the process, we are creating an eyesore of a building which will gravely impact the Catalan Bay area, an area which is already the subject of building pressure on both its southern and northern ends. We raised the serious bulking concerns that we had at the time, but they have been ignored. We firmly believe that development needs to be tempered by moderation and the right to build by the right design. Too often, we are building nondescript monoliths that mar Gibraltar. Surely it is a sad indictment on Gibraltar's modern build that the last major development, inspired by our British colonial Mediterranean heritage, and it was done during their last period in office, is Queensway Quay in the 1990s. Big does not need to be ugly. We are fast ending up with both. In respect to the developments around Catalan Bay, it is worth quoting the words of one of the objectors who described its excessive massing and talked of the design being overall incompatible with Gibraltar's urban character, which is a key aspect of Gibraltar's tourist appeal. With a further valid question, what is the point of economic development if we lose our cultural identity in doing so? I quote him further because I think this encapsulates in a very nice way what we referred to last year during this debate, and I quote, "Buildings should be designed to fit in and not stand out. Our future should not be condemned to live in a cluttered smorgasbord of anonymous towers to a mere facsimile of Benidorm or Dubai, totally cultureless and devoid of charm, having sacrificed any sense of its own history and cultural identity in the name of progress and profit." Yeah. And I close the quote. In the event, the project received outline planning permission, with the minister sitting at the DPC board predictably voting in favour. Unfortunately, in a DPC pact with civil servants, it's not hard to believe that where ministers lead, others are likely to follow. Open DPC board meetings does not make them less susceptible to often heard accusations of ministerial interference at worst and cajoling at best. The volume and massing of the Catalan Bay Hotel have been accepted by the DPC. The design is yet to change. Yet given existing evidence, we are sure that the end result will still be a singular blot on the Bay's Italianate heritage to the detriment of Gibraltar PLC. On the East Side project too, we see the same tension playing out in a highly significant way, where we have the pressing economic and social needs of this housing, should the development proceed, offset against the deep concerns of the Catalan Bay residents and others along this area about the wholly negative effect the marina will have on the environment there. Any destruction of the sea, beachfront, and wider environment here would be an unforgivable mistake and an enduring blight which will be passing on to future generations. And in terms of the DPC proceedings themselves, I must say that I share the view of Eileen Gomez in the Gibraltar Chronicle, in which she states, and I quote, "But as project after project receives planning approval, for many people there is an inescapable sense that the genuine concerns are not being properly heard." And I close the quote. "This is the very sense that I personally got when witnessing Mr. Riedel make his submissions to the DPC in the context of the East Side project. A veritable David against Goliath, a man against big business and entrenched power. Unfortunately, in this instance, it's not looking good for David. This is why the DPC needs further reform. It is no longer fit for purpose. Under constant ministerial scrutiny, it is in real danger of just existing to rubber stamp government planning policy which in the case of private large developments suspiciously smacks of intense backroom lobbying between government and selected enterprise. It is interesting to note that the full force of DPC sanctions tends to fall on small and medium scale developments, while larger developments face cosmetic changes but little else. We need a more robust DPC which speaks to people's concerns. And let's stop, just for once, with the immature point scoring of how things changed in the arrival of the new dawn, as they put it in 2011. Yes, things did change. So did we introduce changes in 1996, but we have to move on. The building spree we have witnessed over the last 20 to 30 years has been phenomenal, but it needs to be tempered by issues that resonate with the people. We need to revisit planning and privacy issues, for instance, both in the new builds and in the old town. Few of us live in patios anymore. Therefore, it is not reasonable to expect new massing and terraces to invade neighbors' privacy or have their well-being circumscribed by blocked access to space and light. In Devils Tower Road, we are seeing how what was an industrial commercial area has increasingly become a mixed bag of high-end assisted housing, residential area with some hospitality mixed in and also with social housing, and all seemingly without any thought as to some uniformity either in design or respect for the people already living there and their right to light and space. It is all the effect of a singular lack of planning and a haphazard approach to new developments. In the Chronicle article just referred to, a resident was quoted as saying, and I quote, "Developers have been allowed to go as high and as close as they wish to ensure maximum profits." A far cry, Mr. Speaker, a far cry from the complaints of the now governing parties when they used to highlight similar issues when they were last in opposition and we were in government. It's a case of do not as I said, but do as I now want. This is why we need a robust, comprehensive development plan. A year on, and there is little sign of it. Although I draw hope from the Honourable Lady's comments of the Chronicle, the same article I've been quoting at length, even if somewhat unclear, when she talked about work on the review starting in earnest. But we can safely assume that the thinking now is that this project is indeed, after all, critical, given that the Minister for Financial Services, when he had responsibility for planning, would not commit in this House to any timings for completion on the basis that a decision had not been made as to whether that particular project was critical. We think it is absolutely doable to work in partnership with business and develop a Gibraltar which preserves its unique heritage and indeed enhances its singular beauty. But it requires, once again, joined up thinking, a new, strong development plan, and a fair bit of imagination and architectural nous. This government is, I'm afraid, failing on all of these. On heritage, there is a sense on this side of the House that it is, once again, somewhat fractured. We have had the ministry dedicated to this area, but many Gold Star projects are jealously retained by the Deputy Chief Minister and his office. In this regard, the Northern Defences, the Mount, and the Road to the Lines projects referred to yesterday come to mind. The recent announcement in respect of the beautification of Lamport is a further case in point, with this particular development, if I'm not mistaken, being fronted by the Minister for Tourism. This piecemeal approach is reflected in the estimates book, in which separate funding is allocated to what are termed heritage building refurbishment and heritage projects, to the detriment of the Ministry for Heritage projects. While in respect of this, we will be seeking further particulars at committee stage. While in respect of we'll be seeking further particulars at committee stage, we do ask whether the Deputy Chief Minister and the Minister for Tourism place so little trust in the Minister for Heritage that these projects are withheld from his purview. In terms of adding further buildings, monuments and artifacts, I must say, I was sorry to see that there had been less progress than would perhaps otherwise have been expected. The lack of commitment to protect the beautiful, now former, Social Security building at Governor's Parade was also less than we would have desired. Any impact to the architecture of that building would affect not just the building itself, but the entire surrounding environment, which, barring a few notable exceptions, has remained as it is for 2 centuries. An example, therefore, of a building which should receive full statutory protection, given that the building belongs to the government. I can't see what the delay in listing is, unless the whole area has been scheduled for a new development. Who knows? The government's seeming lack of imagination encompasses the restoration plans involving our extant artillery pieces throughout the rock. Much, we would say, too much, is left to voluntary work that is undertaken by the eager and enthusiastic Fortress of Gibraltar Group and the Gibraltar Heritage Trust. Thanks to them and their essentially free work, Gibraltar's artillery is being allowed to survive and thereby pass as a fitting reminder of glorious past to future generations, which is the right thing to do. We sincerely thank them for the recent works carried out on Lord Airy's gun battery. But this is a fundamental question. Where is the government in all of this? Beyond granting permission, they are singularly absent from most of the proceedings, although they are happy to be present at any unveiling or the taking of photographs for the press. Again, we need a robust plan of heritage maintenance and restoration to bring back our guns, our walls, and our bunkers. In this, the government is conspicuous by its absence. It was surprising to hear Mr. Picardo's remarks yesterday, and I lose track of time, about the recent developments in the United States Supreme Court in relation to the position on abortion. Let us be absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker. What has happened in the US is that the Supreme Court has handed down responsibility and devolved powers to the individual states in the country to legislate according to their own democratic and political wishes. It will now be for the individual states which will have the power to legislate and determine how restrictive or permissive their abortion laws are. It does not make abortion illegal. It just gives power to take the decision back to locally accountable representatives. As one commentator recently put it, and I quote, "Returning policy decisions on such a literal matter of life or death to the democratic system is something that all who cherish liberty should welcome," and I close the quote. Mr. Picardo, we know, is a champion of the progressive cause, one that grows more dogmatic and intrusive by the day. He attends every party and wears every T-shirt of every fashionable cause in town, but neither he nor the new and increasingly belligerent New Left hold the monopoly of the truth, compassion, or social justice, despite the rhetoric and despite the tough talk. Yesterday, he said that Gibraltar has no reverse gear on rights and progress and can only move forward in one direction. He also said that any attempt to go back on abortion or on any of the other progressive causes would be met with ferocious opposition. There is no need for that kind of radical language in the context of a parliamentary democracy. We all need to calm down. He has his vision, and I and others will have theirs. One is progressive, and the other now deemed conservative. But both are equally legitimate visions of society, although in Gibraltar it seems increasingly that the former rarely recognizes and respects of the latter. In a truly liberal and democratic society, you should be able to express your views whilst absolutely respecting others and not be the subject of ridicule or suffer the full force of the cancel culture. Whatever happens in the future with abortion or any other issue should be decided by the people of Gibraltar in democratic elections, and they will cast a vote in one direction or another. That is the way democracies operate. The voice of the electorate expressed here in Parliament in general elections. The street, the stage, the demonstrations, the festivals, and the shouting of slogans and waving on banners in the public highway are mere accessories of the fundamental exercise of the democratic will of the people. To quote Shakespeare, which I know the Honourable Chief Minister is very fond of, "Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." There is no democratic legitimacy in ferocious opposition and noise when the people make their views known through the ballot box. That is what matters. This is far from being anti-anything. It is far from being anti-anything. This is basic democracy, where with respect and understanding and sensible debates between people who hold opposing views can and should prevail. In the context, particularly, and I end here, Mr. Speaker, of tourism, a reference has been made to the issue of the ongoing negotiations with the EU and Spain. A hugely significant issue for our future, if there ever was one. Yesterday, we heard the Chief Minister state that he remains, and I quote him, deeply optimistic that a treaty is now increasingly probable. I do not think it is at all controversial to wish the Chief Minister and his government very well in its endeavours to bring this critical accord, which safeguards our safe lines, to a successful conclusion as soon as is practicably possible. The treaty, if it were to achieve a mobility agreement for fluid access to the frontier, would be of huge importance to our quality of life and lay the basis for enhanced economic development and cooperation in the entire region. It is further hoped that business, investors, and entrepreneurs will be able to use Gibraltar and the hinterland as a springboard for ambitious and commercial initiatives, create employment and economic opportunities for all. On December the 31st, 2020, Gibraltar was finally, and unfortunately for the vast majority of us here, dragged out of the European Union, kicking and screaming, following Britain's unfortunate decision to abandon the EU after the Brexit referendum in 2016, now 6 years ago. We were left on a cliff edge, facing the prospects of 2 to 6 hour queues and the dramatic existential domino effect, which could have had potentially devastating consequences for our economy, which then was further hit by or at that stage had already been hit by the COVID pandemic. The New Year's Eve agreement secured by the government, despite the issues which we have identified on this side of the House, offered us a glimmer of hope that diplomacy could yet avert a worst-case scenario of Gibraltar crashing out of the EU without any mitigating measures. It is that blueprint, we are told, that forms the basis of the much-awaited EU-UK Treaty on Gibraltar, which holds the key to our future prosperity and continued economic success. We look forward to the publication of the full treaty text. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.